Welcome, everyone, to another day of the Food Allergy Lifestyle Summit, where we are talking all things food allergies, food sensitivities, how to make sense of the information out there so that we all can eat better and feel better. My guest today is Mira Dessy, the ingredient guru. I'm so excited to have her with us today. She is an author, a public speaker, and a board-certified holistic health practitioner. She supports clients in reaching their health goals through holistic nutrition, lifestyle modifications, and chemical cleanup. That's going to be a very interesting topic for us to go through today. Thank you, Mira, for being here with us.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm so excited to talk about this. It's such an important topic, and so many people don't realize that that's actually a crucial part to their wellness journey. So I'm really
Yeah.
delighted to be talking about that with you.
Yeah, great. This is going to be such a great conversation. So, let's start at the beginning.
Sure.
Most of us that get into this field where we're really like just detectives about food and how we feel and additives, and again, we'll talk chemicals too. I believe you have your own health story of what drew you to this field. So tell us about your journey.
Sure. And yeah, the thing is, you don't know what you don't know until you are sort of forced to learn.
Mm.
And I'll share that many, many years ago, I was a database administrator for an international research firm. And I also, my friends always claimed that I was like the healthiest eater in the group. And we certainly, we had the CSA, and I made a lot of our food and everything else. And so I thought I was doing everything right. And over time, my health began to decline. I got sicker and sicker until it got to the point where I was living my life on the sofa. I could not work. I could not take care of my kids. I could not even walk up a flight of stairs without lying down on the top stair and just like resting, even if I was going to bed. And then I had to crawl to bed because I was so tired from walking up the stairs. And nobody could figure out what was going on. I actually wound up being diagnosed with 5 different autoimmune disorders. And it was very challenging because I felt like I wasn't being listened to. There was one doctor at one point suggested that maybe I needed to talk to somebody, because they were puzzled, they were convinced it wasn't real. And then one day, a dear friend of mine gave me a book that talked about ingredients in food. It specifically talked about artificial food dye. And I went, huh. And I started digging through my pantry, and I began to realize that even though I'd been eating, I thought, well, there was a whole different level that I was completely unaware of, that I wasn't paying attention to what was in what I was eating, and that there was far more than I thought there was. So over a period of time, I began to really clean up my family's diet, which was not without its own challenges, I will admit. But I began to regain my health. And then at a certain point, I turned to my husband. I said, I think I've taught myself everything I can. I have to go back to school. And so I went and became a nutrition educator. And then from there, wrote a book, became a national speaker, began to help a lot of people because I had discovered that that was this piece that nobody was talking about.
Yeah. All the extra, like just that it's not just about a specific food, but it's the additives, it's all those other layers.
Yeah, it's what's in and what's on what you're eating
Okay.
as well. I mean, yes, that top level is very important, but for some people, the key is actually the piece that we're not really addressing.
Got it. Okay, which then led you into creating a book, right?
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
happen to
tell
have
us
a
about the
copy
book.
here. Yeah. So this is my book. It's called The Pantry Principle: How to Read the Label and Understand What's Really in Your Food. And this book came out of years of going into people's pantries and taking them to the grocery store and admittedly being a little bit frustrated because I was having the same conversation over and over and over. I felt like I should have like push buttons on me because this information is not easy to find. And so I eventually realized that if I pulled it all together and created a resource, it would make it easier for people to understand, because food producers don't really want you to look too deeply at what they're doing. They use a lot of marketing ploys, things called like front of package labeling. So they'll put on the front a full day's vitamin C, and they won't tell you on the back that there are GMO ingredients in there. There are other ingredients that are known to cause cancer. There are things that may contribute to insomnia. But it's got a full day's vitamin C, so we should buy it. So it was really about just making sure that people had some resources so that they could really look at how and what they were eating to change their diet and reclaim their health.
Okay. What do you find are the main culprits? Like when you're looking at that additives, when you were discovering them for yourself, or when you're looking at people's pantries, like what are the big main culprits that you're finding in the food additives?
There's so many of them. And one of the chapters in my book is called The 7 Simple Rules. So I'd like to go through that with you, because if you learn to follow the 7 simple rules, you will actually knock out probably 80% or more of the nasties that are in our food.
Okay.
So the first one is, do you have to look it up? Like, you should not need a degree in biochemistry in order to grocery shop. So, if you have to look up what an ingredient is, you probably don't want to buy it until you've looked it up and made sure that it's something that you really want to eat. The next one is, does it have a number? And that's actually kind of my favorite one. My joke is, there's no such thing as a carrot 12 or grapes 27. Like, it just doesn't exist. And so anytime we see a number, that indicates to us that it's a chemical formulation. So polysorbate 80, polysorbate 60, those are specific formulations, artificial colors, other things like that. So if there's a number on our food, we don't want to eat it. Does it have 4 or more syllables? This is one that we really have to think about, because macadamia, for example, has 5 syllables, and we know what they are. We love them. They're delicious. But there are other words out there. If it's polysyllabic, it has a lot of syllables to it, chances are it's more likely to be a chemical. The next one is it unpronounceable? And this, again, is one that we kind of have to think about, because when quinoa first became popular, there were a lot of people who didn't know how to pronounce it. Same thing with acai. But over time, we learned how to pronounce it, and that, yes, it was a whole food. But if there are other things out there that you cannot pronounce them, or you struggle to pronounce them, you should figure it out before you eat it. Like, don't trust the producers. The next one is, does it end in ATE? And again, you have to think about it, because pomegranate ends in ATE, but so do sorbates, galates, nitrates, all those things. And most of the things that end in ATE are things that we don't want to eat. The next one is it enriched? And when we have enriched foods, that means that the food itself has been stripped. And this most often applies to wheat-based products. They mill the grain, they strip it of approximately 22 different nutrients. And then what happens is, years ago, people started getting really sick, and they discovered that that was because they were removing too many nutrients when they stripped the wheat. So the government passed legislation that required them to put some of them back, and mostly B vitamins, sometimes calcium, sometimes iron. I mean, those are not required, but sometimes they'll put those back in. But I promise you, the B vitamins that they're putting back in are not sourced from natural sources. Those are lab analogs, and they're putting them back in because without them, people will get very ill. So if it's enriched, we don't want to eat it. And usually you'll find enriched at the very top of the food label. So if the first word is enriched, or if it appears in the, anywhere on the label, you don't want it, but usually it's going to appear as the first word. And then the last one is it all capital letters, not words? And that, again, is because they're trying to find abbreviations for long chemical names. So butyl hydroxyanisole, for example, is abbreviated as BHA. It's a whole lot easier to put 3 letters on the label. And so when we see a collection of labels, EDTA, TBHQ, BHA, all of those kinds of things, we don't want to eat that either.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a powerful list. That's a
Yeah.
powerful list to kind of guide you to get started on this journey. Right. I love that.
Well, and here's the other thing that I want to share though, because at this point someone's probably scribbling like mad right now and then
Yeah.
going, I don't know how I'm going to do that
Yeah.
because it's a little overwhelming. Pick one, start there. If you're like, oh, I remember I shouldn't eat enriched things, or oh, numbers are bad, like start there. Just read all those labels and learn how to shift those products that are currently in your diet that have those words on the label or that have that from the rules. Get rid of that and then move on to the next one. Don't feel like
Hmm.
you have to do it all at once.
Hmm. Yeah, because it can be really overwhelming to try and just go, okay,
Yes.
I've got to do all of this stuff at once, but what do I eat? Uh,
Yes.
do you find that there are so many new products out? There's new paleo and keto and gluten-free. I mean, there's all kinds of new dairy-free cheeses. Are you finding that as you're looking at labels, are there a good selection of products in the store that kind of fit into these rules?
There are, but you really have to look for it. And it's so interesting you should say that because the other day I have a group that I run and someone was talking about why is it impossible to find heavy whipping cream that doesn't have added ingredients anymore?
Mm.
Because she found it and it had some gums in it, it had monoglycerides, it had carrageenan in it, and finding just plain pure heavy whipping cream was really difficult.
Ah.
So you still have to look at labels all the time. So yes, there are ingredients that we can eat. Yes, there are real foods there. However, we have to keep checking in and making
Mhm.
sure that it doesn't get modified. There are yogurts now that they make and they add pectin or gelatin to them. And what that tells me is they're not allowing the yogurt to culture the way traditional yogurt cultures, because when you culture it normally, it gets very thick all by itself. But if you're doing it very quickly, or perhaps you have a different process, it's going to be thinner. So you have to thicken it up. And adding pectin or gelatin is one way to do it. But that's
Yeah.
not necessarily a great choice for us.
What a great little trick to know about that. That right, that yogurt would have naturally have thickened on its own, but
Yeah.
that a manufacturer is using that as a shortcut to speed it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear the same things about wine, right? Like people might have a glass of wine that's here from the States, and all of a sudden, like they have headaches or they don't feel well. But if they go back 20 years or we go back to Europe, a similar glass of wine doesn't give them those same effects. And it's about that processing and them speeding up and adding more sugar and things like that.
Some of it also it depends. Wine is actually a little bit of a tricky animal
Hmm.
because there are naturally occurring sulfites and histamines. So depending on how the wine is processed can reduce sulfites or histamines in that wine. But we do also tend to have higher levels in this country simply because of how we make it. There are a growing number of producers who specifically curate and seek out bottles that are low sulfite, low histamine.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, there's one company out there that claims to be a hangover, headache-free wine club. Where you can get that because they're doing organic soils, so
Hmm.
you're not getting the pesticide residue. Their processing allows them to remove those things. So a lot of people seem to not have as many challenges with that.
Yeah, yeah. And people can really just pay attention, right, to how they feel when they're trying these different things.
Absolutely,
I want
yeah.
to ask you a little bit more about the labeling. So one thing we're talking about just being aware of what's in the ingredients, right? Reading those labels, becoming a label detective and paying attention. But what about the other like labeling and certifications that end up on boxes like this is certified gluten-free or this is certified like this contains 0% of X. What about that can you kind of share with us too?
Yeah, that's great. So I will share first the 0%. that's that falls under the category of what I call funny math. You have to look not just at the nutrition panel, you have to look below that at the ingredient panel. For example, you might see something that specifically says it has 0 grams of sugar, but then you read the ingredients and it's got honey or rice syrup or sugar itself. And you're like, how can they say that? It says 0 grams of sugar, but sugar's in the ingredients. Well, the reason they can do that is because if it is less than 0.5 grams per serving, they're allowed to say it has none. So less than half a gram. So it could be 0.499999, and they could say that it has none. And who sets the serving size? The food producer. So if they say it's 2 cookies and 2 cookies has 0, but it turns out there's a little bit, and you eat 3 cookies, all of a sudden you're getting some, but you don't realize that. So that's how they get away with the 0 part. In terms of understanding ingredients and reading the label, it's where we really have to take the time to educate ourselves. Honestly, that's why I wrote the book, so that it could be a resource. This is not something that you learn once. It is also, unfortunately, a moving target. You and I have talked before about the fact that who owns your food is a very tricky question, and food companies tend to buy and sell each other on a regular basis. So that web of food ownership changes, and what the food producers do to the food changes. One of my big examples that I use, Ben & Jerry's used to be very, very clean. Now they're using carrageenan and other ingredients. Many years ago, Ben & Jerry's was purchased by Unilever. Unilever kept Ben & Jerry on for, I want to say, like 3 years, and promised them that they weren't going to change anything while they were there. And then over time, now there's all these different things going into their products because it's more convenient for them. One of the things that people tend to forget is that food producers aren't really in the business of making food. Their business is making money. Food just happens to be how they do it.
Ooh. Oh, wow. Yeah. I'll let that one sink in for a second.
Yeah.
That's I love that you just said the part about how companies, right, buy and sell each other, that a product that might have really worked for you for a while, all of a sudden something changes. I've
Mm-hmm.
certainly noticed that, right? Like I can't eat gluten and dairy. Like those two things just do not work for me. And I'll think that I'm doing fine. Like I'll think like, okay, these crackers always work for me. But then one day I'm like, why do I not feel right?
Mm-hmm.
So then it's one thing to get your labels and understand your products and know that, but then that doesn't mean things won't change, that they won't change the recipe slightly. And if you notice a change in your body, that like, oh, it's time to look at all those labels again.
Yeah, I encourage
Yeah.
people when they start not feeling well and they don't know why, I strongly encourage them to food journal. First of all, to see if they
Mm,
can kind of identify what's going on, but also food journaling allows them to write down and remember what they're eating. Because let's face it, you and I are both professionals in this business, and I don't remember what I had for breakfast 3 days ago if I don't write it down. Like we think we're going to remember, but we really don't.
mhm.
And so when we notice a decline or a change in our health or our body symptoms, and yeah, sometimes it can be, we're under the weather, we ate something that didn't agree with us, and it's a passing thing. But if it's an ongoing thing, food journaling can really help us see, and then from there also identify specific foods. And from there we start going, oh, maybe I need to recheck those labels.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good habit to get into. And again, like kind of what you're really pointing out is paying attention to how you feel,
Hmm.
right? Like really,
Absolutely.
really listening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So we've been talking about food, but we've also been talking about additives and other things. So for someone who's out there who kind of gets a sense that, okay, there's something that's not working for me, there's a food that I'm reacting to, I've got like GI distress, stomach upset, things like that. They either know what foods it is or they don't, they're still trying to figure it out. But if they're going along and trying different things and they just don't quite seem to be figuring it out, it kind of seems like there's some other things that you're alluding to that they can look at. One is like the labels, right? Like
Yes.
all those little food additives. But what about the other things we use, the things in our environment, the things in our hair care, like all that other stuff? Could that also be a problem for people?
Absolutely. Part of the challenge is we don't, I have had clients where I've gone in and their pantry is really clean, really good. And then we go into the bathroom and there are problems because some of the things that they're sensitive to are in their personal care products. I found that vital wheat gluten, for example, tends to be used in shampoo as a thickener. You have to read the ingredients to find it. There are a lot of artificial colors in personal care products. There are other ingredients, sulfates, sulfides, all those kinds of things that can be in there as well. And so we have to remember that it's not just our food in some cases, but our environment as well.
Okay. And do you go into that in the book as well?
So the book specifically talks about the food label and
Okay.
what's in what we eat. I do have a newsletter that people can sign up for where I share what's going on a regular basis, and we talk about everything. Sometimes it's about personal care or environmental things. Sometimes it's about food changes, and sometimes it's about food wins. One of the things I strongly encourage people to do is to don't dismiss the impact that you can have by making a change. Because let's remember, food producers are in the business of making money. If you stop doing things, they will change.
Mm.
The story that I like to share is, we all remember when the big hoo-ha about high fructose corn syrup first happened. And they had those stupid commercials where, someone would say, "Oh, want a popsicle?" And the other person would say, "No, it has high fructose corn syrup." And the first person who's happily slurping up their popsicle would go, "Really? What's wrong with that?" And the other person would go, and look really stupid. And now we know that high fructose corn syrup is actually really bad for us. It's linked to diabetes. It's linked to obesity. It's linked to liver issues. Like, there's a lot of things wrong with it. And so we now have some labels that in big letters say no HFCS, no high fructose corn
Hmm.
syrup, and they don't charge that much more for the product. So we do have more of an impact. I also remember when I was raising 3 children and we were going through 2 gallons of milk a week, my husband would freak out because the difference between conventional milk and organic milk was something like $8 a gallon.
Hmm.
And now it's down to like $2 a gallon. That's because people have made a change. And so the more adopters we have, the less expensive it gets, and the more food producers are willing to invest in retooling and reconfiguring.
Yeah, we are voting with our dollars,
Yes.
right? Right. If
And we're more
everyone's buying,
powerful than we think we are.
yeah, if people are avoiding certain foods, then they don't get purchased off the shelves, right? Yeah, and then stores will make a change.
Yes.
Okay. What about, so people can, if they're really not sure what food it is, like they have all this information from you today of like different layers they can be looking at. What about just going and getting a food test, right? Like there are different kinds of tests out there where you can go get your food allergies or sensitivities tested. What do you think about those?
I think it's a good idea. One of the big issues that I have, definitely elimination diet is good. That is a great first step. Try removing the 7
Mhm.
most common food allergenic substances from your diet: dairy, corn, wheat, soy, fish, nuts, and just take those out of the diet and see how you do. But the challenge is that only looks at top level stuff. It doesn't look at the ingredients. And you really want to do a test that will not only show you what you're sensitive to, but show you if it's on that other foundational level by looking at ingredients. So I believe that that's a really important step for a lot of people.
Hmm. There's a lot of companies out there. Like I know Everlywell has been a real popular one. Do you look for something specific in like the quality of the test you're looking for? Like you just said, ingredients, like how many foods are being used or
Yeah.
you're being tested for?
So my personal favorite company is a company called ELISA Act Biotechnologies, and they have what's called an LRA test, a lymphocyte response assay.
Mm.
And that's where, there, first of all, I should explain that there are several different types of food sensitivity. And one of them is looking at the lymphocyte response, but then there's also IgE, IgG, like there's other MRT, there's other different things that you can look at. So with the LRA, one of the things that happens is we're looking not only for cell size, because the cells will swell in response to the body reacting to whatever proteins are getting through and getting into the bloodstream, it also lights up. Like there's actually a halo, a physical halo around the lymphocyte showing that it's been activated. So you can't just go by cell size. And I was very fortunate. I had the opportunity several years ago to go to the company in Virginia, to their lab, and look through a microscope and see what was going on. It was really fascinating. And so you can't just go by cell size alone. You're really looking for that lit up response. And then, as I said, it's also looking for not only the ingredients, that particular company, they also test for agricultural exposures, environmental toxins, those kinds of things. So we're getting a very thorough and comprehensive test. And I'll actually share a really funny story about that. I had one client once who came up sensitive to hibiscus. And she said to me, "That's impossible. I hate hibiscus. I don't drink hibiscus tea. I don't eat hibiscus candy. I don't use anything hibiscus. It can't be true." And I said, "Well, you're going to have to be a detective. You're going to have to figure out where it's coming from." About 3 weeks later, she contacted me and she said, "You're not going to believe this. I found it. It was in my facial toner." She'd been spritzing it on her face every day for years and never looked at the ingredients, didn't know it was in there. And because it was getting on her face, on her skin, it was getting absorbed into her system.
Yeah. My goodness, interfacial toner. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's making me wonder about my facial toner, right? What's in
We
there?
don't look at those things.
Yeah. Well, because we're not eating it, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
putting something on your hair, you don't think that it's getting into you,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with everything that you know about, yourself, your health, your sensitivities, everything that you've learned about labels and everything, what does your diet look like or right now? Like how do you keep balance with everything and traveling and having a
Yeah.
busy schedule and a family, but also knowing what you know and knowing like how foods make you feel? Like just what does that look like for you?
I will be really honest. When I'm traveling or when I'm visiting others, I have learned to relax and just recognize that I am not always in perfect control of my diet.
Mm.
And so my goal, and I encourage others to do this as well, my goal is to make my home environment as clean as possible for me. For example, last night, I was invited over to somebody else's house. I knew that they were making quiche. I knew it was going to have a crust. And so instead of insisting that they make something else, I simply responded, "I'm going to bring my own meal." And she was like, "That's fine." But when I'm on the road, it's just a matter, you make the best choices you can. And then when you get home, you work to clean things up and get back to what is typical for you. The one thing that I really don't want people to do is to get so overwhelmed by everything has to be perfect. I can't go out. I can't go over to my mother-in-law's house. I can't go out with my friends. I can't do this. I can't do that. And then we develop a condition called orthorexia, which is essentially a disordered form of eating where we're so paralyzed by our need to perfectly control our diet that we're not really able to function well. So 80% clean generally means your at-home environment is under your control, and the rest of it you just sort of do the best you can and then fix what you can when you get home.
I love that approach. That sounds very balanced and patient and understanding with yourself, and just not trying to control every second and being stuck in worry, right? All the
Sure.
time.
And yeah, and there are options, so I have been out, like I at one point we were visiting family and we all went out for burgers. And so I just got my burger without a bun.
Hmm.
That's pretty easy to do. That's making a choice right there.
Yeah.
Now, was it an organic grass-fed burger? Probably not. But I was out with my family. And
Yeah.
so there's that mindful community, wonderful time together. Like, we also have to remember that eating is more than just the simple act of chewing and swallowing. It is this whole body, whole mind thing where we are nourishing on a lot of different levels, especially when we are spending those meal times with people we love.
Hmm. And that's what's important about that
Yes,
time. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. So, so with everything we've been talking about, there's so much great information that I know our audience is getting in this conversation, and how they can start arming themselves with the power of like understanding labels, understanding what's in their food, what's around them, what's in their medicine cabinet, all of that. For someone who is this is new to them, or they're struggling, they're not quite sure where to start, and they really just want to kind of understand all of this, they want to make some forward progress, what are like your top 2 or 3 things you would suggest to them for places to start?
Sure. You know, the best place to start, honestly, we talked about this just a moment ago, I really believe, is to food journal. Write down what you're eating, when you're eating. And I'm not saying weigh and measure. I mean, you can. But don't drive yourself crazy if that's going to do that. But writing down what you're eating, when you're eating, how you're feeling. Check in with yourself, because I will, for example, I had someone at one point who we removed corn from their diet, and about 2 or so weeks later, he said, my shoulders don't hurt anymore. I used to always have achy shoulders, and I thought it was because I was getting old. Like, I just put it down to arthritis. No, it wasn't. It was because he was having this inflammation from eating corn. And so when we write that stuff down, that really helps us to remember.
Mm.
And then the other is, I really would encourage people to do things like do some food intolerance testing. Like, you would be surprised how many things people can be sensitive to without even being aware of it. Once you get it out of the diet, you feel so much better,
Mm.
because it's kind of like the frog in the hot water experiment that we all learned about in high school biology. You put a frog in water and you slowly turn it up and he doesn't know. Well, if you're slowly developing these food intolerance symptoms and it's just happening on such a low level, you're not aware of it. It's not until it's completely gone that you understand what feeling better really feels like. So I think doing that. And then I am going to put in a plug for my book. I really think you should just go to Amazon and get The Pantry Principle, because there's great information in there that can help you and your family reclaim your pantry and take back control of your food.
Yes, absolutely. Those are 3 really powerful tips. And yeah, there's a lot of great information in your book,
Thank
especially
you.
for people that are a little bit new to this and they need some guidance. We all need coaches. We all need guidance. People who've been through some of this before us or a little farther on the journey can really help us move forward faster than doing
Yeah,
it on our own. Well,
absolutely.
Mira, this has been an incredible conversation. Again, like I think that just our audience is really, really getting so much out of this. So her contact information, it's all there. So you can go and get on that newsletter, especially as she was sharing, like there's so much more information that she's constantly digging up and wants to share with everyone else. Because sometimes it's not just getting rid or cleaning up our diet, getting rid of like those 1 or 2 foods that don't work for us. If there's something else that's nagging and something else that just you're quite not feeling 100%, looking at all these other layers that Mira has provided for us is just such great valuable information that if you just get curious and look around and kind of play around with your food, you just might discover that there's something still kind of lurking in there that all of a sudden you just feel like another 10, 20, 30% better than you can remember feeling. And wouldn't we all be lucky to do that? So thank you, Mira, so much for being with us today. Thank you all that have been here watching and listening. I know that you are taking away so much great information from this conversation and all the other interviews that we have had. So I will see you all soon.